Shortly, we will take you straight to Melbourne, though, where Josh Frydenberg, Federal Energy Minister, is speaking.
Council meeting came at a critically important time following the blackout in South Australia. We had an extremely constructive discussion among ministers over the course of the day, including a 2-hour session this morning behind closed doors, which was ministers only. Today's meeting was a real breakthrough. Energy security is back at #1. Ministers agreed, as outlined in the communique, that their primary responsibility is energy security, energy stability and energy affordability. At the meeting, we were briefed by the experts on the developments in battery technology. We were briefed about the role of interconnectors and how they can improve linkages among the national electricity market. We discussed the implications of state-based renewable energy targets. We talked about strengthening infrastructure in light of extreme weather events and a number of other issues, including the frequency control and ancillary services that are needed in the face of a higher intermittent generation. But the real breakthrough was the agreement for an independent review to create and to develop a blueprint for energy security across the national electricity market. This will build on the work that has already been done and is still underway by the Australian Energy Market Operator, the Australian Energy Market Commission and the Australian Energy Regulator, as well as other expert bodies and officials like the Vertigan Review and like the gas reforms that we have already undertaken. The idea is to prepare a blueprint for Australia to meet not only its climate change goals, but also to ensure primarily the energy security and the sustainability and the affordability of the system going forward. The review will be chaired by Dr. Alan Finkel, the Commonwealth Chief Scientist, a man who is well versed in energy issues. He will be supported by 2 others who Council will determine in the coming weeks. And the report, a preliminary report, will be provided to energy ministers ahead of the COAG leaders meeting in December, with a final report being concluded early next year. This was a real breakthrough meeting. It was held in a very constructive way. And of course, the discussions are just the start of what needs to take place after the terrible events in South Australia. Are there any questions?
What sort of skills are you looking for in the other 2 members of the inquiry?
It's important that we have people who understand energy markets. This is very complex. But as we laughed at the meeting, so many of the good people are currently working for federal and state governments or national bodies. But we are determined to ensure the best possible people are working together with Dr. Alan Finkel, as well as with the relevant agencies and bodies who are going to be involved. The Secretariat will have representation from the states and territories. This is very much a COAG initiative, and it is very much designed to deliver a national energy security blueprint for the future of this country.
We heard the South Australian Energy Minister say that AEMO revealed to the meeting that there wasn't anything to do with the nature of wind technology which caused the power to drop out, that it was actually just a software issue that could be easily corrected. Do you accept that it is an inherent problem with wind?
Well, AEMO did give us a very important briefing at the meeting, which was an update on their recent report into the events in South Australia. Now, that was a preliminary update that they have provided, so there is still work underway. But as I and the Prime Minister and others have consistently said, the events in South Australia were caused by those 1 in 50-year weather events, including 80,000 lightning strikes. This led to a cascading effect across the network. AEMO still has work to do, but that is the principal reason that the lights went out in South Australia. But there are much broader issues to do with the reliability of the system that we heard about today as a result of a higher uptake of intermittent power, particularly wind and solar. They don't have the frequency and the control and the ancillary services that you would otherwise get from the generation of coal or gas or hydro power. And there is also a greater reliance on interconnectors as a result of the unpredictable nature of intermittent generation. So there are really two issues at play here. What happened in South Australia and getting to the bottom of that and ensuring that the system is robust and resilient going forward. But it's also about dealing with the growing use of intermittent power across the national electricity market and ensuring that we can preserve and protect energy security, and that is what the discussion and what the review is all about.
None of the states appear to be willing to turn on the question of their own renewable energy targets unless perhaps you commit to some further target beyond 2020. Is that a possibility or are you just going to have to remain at odds with them?
Well, we actually heard at this meeting from the AEMC, the Australian Energy Market Commission, an important body, that these state-based targets do raise serious questions about the efficiency, the cost and the location of investment decisions. And that work is still underway, and we had a preliminary report from the AEMC today. And others like the Grattan Institute have raised their concerns with these state-based targets. So our point is we want to see a truly national system. We'd like to see greater harmonisation. I made that point to state ministers today. They're obviously not budging, the state ministers, but I do note that some of their leaders are talking now about aspirational targets that they've adopted. Well, we'd like to see those targets more harmonised with the Commonwealth, because ultimately what we want to see is more renewable energy and lower emissions, but not at the expense of the affordability of electricity and not at the expense of the stability of the system.
But is there some merit then in the federal government filling that gap post-2020? You have a RET scheme that runs till 2030 but no actual target beyond 2020.
Well, it's a 33,000 gigawatt hour, as you know, target till 2020. Currently we're at 15% of our power generation from renewable sources. To get to 23.5% by 2020 is going to be hard work, but we think we can do so in a way that stabilises the system as well. That's the key point here. We'll have a review in 2017. I don't want to prejudge what the outcome of that review will be, other than to say today's announcement about the work that will be undertaken by Dr Finkel, together with the important national bodies represented at the meeting, including the Energy Market Operator, the Energy Market Regulator and the Energy Market Commission, will be very important for our thinking in the 2017 review.
Is there any problem with the fact that we seem to have, if you count all the reviews on, probably take the fingers of more than one hand, with, I think you have CSIRO doing some work on the future electricity grid, AEMO and the AEMC are doing some work, and the regulator has to look at potential rule changes, and now we have this Finkel committee, which I'm sure will be very excellent, sort of coming over the top, and the government has a separate review of climate policy in 2017. Is there any risk that we're going to be at cross purposes with all these separate inquiries?
No, I think they do complement each other, and if you look back to the last COAG meeting we had in August, we agreed a number of historic reforms for the gas market, which will really make a difference to pricing, liquidity and the transparency in the gas system. And we also heard at today's meeting how important gas is as a transition fuel, because it has half the emissions of coal and it has those characteristics that you get with base load generation. So gas is extremely important, and we've made some concrete decisions on that in August. The point about energy policy is it is really a shared responsibility between state, territory and Commonwealth governments. That's why we've got these various organisations that are national bodies, but with the buy-in of the states and the territories. That is why we need a body like COAG to work effectively, and we need to find the common purpose, because if we don't, then you get unilateral decisions which don't produce the best possible outcomes. And so much is at stake here. Ultimately, we saw in South Australia a disaster. And Jay Weatherall talked about a big experiment, which was a big experiment that failed because the lights went out. So it's critically important we don't see that again, either in South Australia or elsewhere. And as I've said previously, whether you are living by the beach on the Sunshine Coast, whether you are watching a game of cricket under lights at the MCG or the SCG, or whether you're working at the steelworks at Whyalla, you are all connected by the same national electricity market, and therefore decisions taken in one jurisdiction impact upon decisions taken in another. That's why we need real coherence and common purpose and decisions like that were taken today.
We've heard different ministers give different opinions about an EIS, and given that an EIS could potentially, could potentially help make gas prices more competitive, depending on where the benchmark's set. What's the federal government's view on an EIS and whether or not it should be something that's on the table or at least considered?
Well, again, as I've said publicly, the emissions intensity scheme has been put forward by a number of parties, but I'm not going to prejudge what the outcomes of the 2017 review will be. An emissions intensity scheme doesn't actually deal with the immediate problem that we have, which is the stability of the system. And that's why we heard from AEMO about the importance of maintaining the appropriate frequency as intermittent generation comes in. We heard about the importance of the interconnectors and their role in ensuring stable and secure supply, as well as a number of other factors that are at play. That's what we need to immediately focus on so that we stabilise the system, because we have seen, particularly in a state like South Australia, an uptake of intermittent generation.
But as you see more coal exit, aren't you going to see more of those frequency problems unless you do something to encourage new baseload generation in gas and emissions intensity scheme?
Well, we're very upfront. We'd like to see more gas generation in Australia because it is such an important transition fuel. And Tom Katsantonis from South Australia has talked very openly about that, not just in terms of the generation of power through gas, but also gas supply and gas development, and a number of states are doing important work in that regard. So gas will be vitally important, but the emissions intensity scheme is not the only way to generate more gas power. You can do that through various other means, and some of the reforms that we agreed at the last COAG will go some way towards that.
Last question. Minister, not all renewable energy or distributed generation sources are equal in terms of their role on the grid in being stable or unstable sources. Was it discussed in the room about renewable energy perhaps as an asset to the grid in terms of solar providing reactive power or batteries for frequency regulation, which was a primary problem in South Australia?
Look, it's a very good question, and I've been very careful to point out hydropower as a renewable source is able to strongly stabilise the system because it doesn't have those frequency and voltage issues that you do see from other renewables such as wind and solar. And so you do need to differentiate between the various power sources. And what's interesting about Tasmania is that their issue came when the downing of the interconnector, Basslink, and as you'll see in the communique, there's talk about the work that the Commonwealth and the Tasmanian government are doing, looking into a second Basslink project. But what was really exciting about today's meeting was to hear from the CSIRO about battery storage and the opportunities that that will create, because you can deal with intermittent generation into the future, but some of those developments are still some way away. And we're investing heavily, taxpayers' money, through ARENA and other bodies, into the R&D into battery storage. We also talked today about developing a greater market for this frequency control and ancillary services, because as it was pointed out to us by AEMO, historically, inertia, which is so important in the system, has been a free good. And suddenly it's more in demand with higher intermittent generation. So that's why we need to look at the system as a whole, not on a state-by-state basis. And I thank my state and territory colleagues today for the very constructive and the productive way they engaged in the discussions. And I think we're going to see some real concrete benefits come out of it. Thank you.